and their involvement in historic preservation. So, as I indicated, May is the National Preservation Month, also known as the Historic Preservation Month. It celebrates the nation's heritage through historic places. It all began in 1973, and they actually only had a week that they called National Preservation Week. And it was the week that they had their the National Trust had their annual luncheon. And then in 2005, they decided to extend it for the entire month of May because this gave more opportunity for organizations to celebrate the heritage of their cities in the states. So you say, well, what is historic preservation? It's an established procedure, excuse me, to preserve, conserve, and protect buildings, objects, landscapes, and other artifacts of significance. But prior to 1966, the preservation really focused on established landmarks like the Lincoln Memorial, Monticello, Paul Revere's house, and they restored and maintained it, became museums, but there was no interaction between the state and federal governments regarding historic preservation. And then in the 1950s, through the programs like urban renewal, interstate highway, and massive public works projects, major destruction of buildings, and there was nobody could do anything because there was no legal standing. And then this publication came out. It was called "With Heritage So Rich" by Beard Wood, and it exposed the loss of our architectural heritage, and it said preservation needed the support of the federal government, and it recommended that you do surveys of historically and architecturally significant buildings, sites, structures, districts, and so on, and include them in a national register. And that preservation should be a partnership for local, state, and federal government. And it should establish state preservation officers. It also should provide financial incentives, programs for preservation, just like it already, to balance the incentives that it already had gives to new construction. And as a result, was the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. That was the most important historic preservation legislation ever passed by Congress. It included every recommendation from the book "With Heritage So Rich." By the way, that book is on, you can access it virtually through the National Trust website. It's about over 200 and some pages. But if you're interested in reading it, you can do it because for the month of May, it's available. It also established the National Register of Historic Places, and preservation became an integral part of our society. Eventually, over 3,000 preservation organizations were established by 93. And many universities started multiple preservation curriculums. The National Trust membership grew from 10,000 plus to over 260,000 by 1993. It provided for local preservation ordinances, and it established local preservation partnership known as the Certified Local Government Program, which we refer to mostly as CLGs. So what is a CLG? A Certified Local Government Program is a partnership to identify, evaluate, and protect historic properties. It provides a formal role for local government to comment on National Register nominations. It provides us technical assistance and training for local government staff and preservation boards. There are CLGs funds specifically laid aside for CLGs, and if you're a member of the CLG, you can compete for those matching grant funds from the historic preservation funds for CLGs. Income producing properties in CLG districts are eligible for the federal tax credit. There are 56 CLGs in Florida. Boca Raton is not a CLG. In 2012, Sue Gillis and Historical Society and myself, we modified, with the help of the state, modified the Boca Raton ordinance to meet CLG standards. The modified ordinance was submitted to the city for approval, but it was never finalized. The Boca Raton does have a local historic preservation ordinance. It has an established preservation board. It contains criteria for designating historic significant properties. It has design guidelines for modifications of historically significant buildings. And it regulates modifications to these buildings and districts, but it is not a CLG. The sources of the funding for CLGs comes from the National Park Service, and it's really an accumulation of funds from payments, rentals, bonuses, and leasing and production of natural resources from federal and Indian lands, as well as outer continental shelf. And in 2015, there was an accumulation of $9.87 billion in the preservation funds for the overall funds. And it was distributed, you can see, Indian tribes, land, water conservation, states gets 18%, reclamation gets 14%, and US Treasury gets 48% plus. Historic Preservation Fund, 1.5% of that over $9 billion, 1.5% or 150 million. The actual appropriation depends on the annual congressional appropriations. Half of the fully authorized $150 million for Historic Preservation Fund has never been allocated or appropriated. Instead, the revenues stay in the Treasury, US Treasury. So it did establish the National Register of Historic Places through the Act of 1966 and established criteria for historic designations. And this is what properties that are listed on the National Register, what it does do, identify those properties to be given special consideration with developing projects. And projects that are federally funded, permitted, or licensed that may result in damage, then they have to be reviewed by the Federal Advisory Council. Income producing properties are eligible for federal income tax and allows counties and cities to grant ad valorem tax exemptions. What it does not do, it does not automatically preserve buildings. It cannot keep a property from being modified or destroyed unless there's federal funding or it's regulated by local ordinance. A study in 1966 showed that over 12,000 historic structures listed in the NR National Register had been destroyed. Private property owners can deal with their property any way they see fit. There's no restrictive covenants on the property, and the property owners are not required to open their list of property to any visitations. These are properties here in Boca Raton that are listed on the National Register. The Miser Administration Building, which we today know as the Addison. The Aiken House is on the National Register. That's in Old Floresta. The Lavender House in Old Floresta. The house on Coconut Road, it's on the Barrier Island here in Boca. And then, of course, the Boca Raton City Hall and the train station, and Old Betsy, which is the Boca Raton fire engine, and the two Seaboard airline cars, the lounge car and the dining car. These are all on the National Register of Historic Places here in Boca Raton. There are fees that are connected if you want to designate a property locally or on the National Register. In Boca Raton, there's an advertising fee that you have to deposit up to $1,500. If there's any money left of that, you get it back. In addition, you have to, for a designation of a structure or a district, you have to pay an addition $510. Coral Gables in Dade County, they have no fees at all. Delray Beach, their fees for historic designation is $250. Fort Lauderdale, for property, individual property is $650. For a historic district is $2,550. West Palm Beach individual designation is $125 and West Palm Beach is $500. So there's a lot of differences between, and these are just some of them. Obviously, there's many, many more, but this gives you a sense of the fees that are connected to designated property. When you shouldn't just put a property on just because it's old. Not all old buildings should be saved just because they're old. You have to ask yourself some questions. Does it differentiate your community from another? Does it reflect the evolution of the community? Does it contribute more to the community than it is taken away? Does it maintain its architectural integrity? Does it establish community identity? Does it encourage investment? Is it valuable to the community? Does it have a story to tell about your community? And does it give a sense of place? We have two historic districts. The benefit of historic districts is that it prevents unregulated and insensitive redevelopment. It's good for environment through revitalization and recycling of materials. It gives us links to the past, bringing meaningful history to people's lives. It's a visible record of the community and it attracts tourist dollars. And it gives residents a sense of place as decisions are made in public and not behind closed doors. Old Floresta was our first historic district that was established in 1990. This was obviously done by Addison Meisner. He built 29 houses and initially, and this is what it looks like. Old Floresta, and gives you a sense. It has a signage and which tells you where it is. And it was, as I said, done by Addison Meisner, who was the architect for the affluent. And this is the Aiken House, which is, Aiken was one of the 5 people who was part owners of the land, 35 acres of land before it was sold to Addison Meisner. And Addison Meisner, when he went bankrupt after 1 year, those 5 people bought the land back for a fraction of the cost, plus 29 houses. They got 29 houses. So this is the Aiken property that is on the National Register, and it's in Old Floresta, and it has a historic marker. As you can see, these are elements of that contribute to make it worthwhile as a historic significance in our community. Valuable to the community, architectural integrity, identity, and so on and so forth. Pearl City. Pearl City became a historic district in 2002. Pearl City is the oldest community in Boca Raton. It's located at the corner of Dixie and Glades Road, and it was really auctioned off specifically to colored people because they needed workers to work the farms, and the people had to come from Deerfield or from Delray. So they created Pearl City so that they had a place to live and they could easily get to the farm's work. The Tree of Knowledge, that's a very important cultural element in Pearl City. It's located right here at on Glades Road. You can see it's almost perched on the curb. And the reason it's so important is back in 1978 when they were extending Glades Road to Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So anyway, because it had, through the Transportation Act, Section 4 of the Transportation Act, that that recognizes cultural elements, and the tree was a major part of Pearl City because everybody used to hang out under the tree because of the canopy and spread the gossip and everything else. And it became a cultural element. So therefore it had to be given recognition. And as a result of it, they realigned Glades Road. So that tree saved Pearl City. The Macedonia AME Church was built in 1918. It's the oldest church in the community. And then this is a typical house, it's still standing, built in 1935. Pearl City, as I said, became a historic district in 2002. So I'm just going to go through some historically significant properties. Some are designated as not, or should be. But for example, this is Meisner Development Corporation Administration Building, as we knew back in the day, it was back in the day. And here's his group, and they were still obviously building or landscaping it at the time. And this is what it looks like today. So it really does reflect the evolution of the community. Today, it's a special events place, fabulous location, and everybody loves it. They got a federal tax credit to add this gateway to it. And if you look really close to the building, the gateway or entrance there is 5 inches apart from the main building. It didn't touch because of the federal tax. They had to follow certain regulations. But it's very popular even to this day, and always, and will be for a long, long time. And it was Addison Meisner, of course, was behind all of this. Addison Meisner built the Cloister Inn in 1925. This is the Cloister Inn here. This is the courtyard, which is right behind here. It's not in perspective. And right here is next to the Boca Raton Resort and Club and Waldorf Astoria Resort. It is the Cloister Inn still standing there, although it's not given that name, but that's the exact same building, and it still maintains its architectural integrity. It does reflect the evolution of the community, and so it's caught between the 300, the Boca Raton Resort, and the tower. Downtown Boca Raton was really down back in the 50s, was just east of Sanborn Square. And there was a road on Boca Raton Road, came through directly and connected to Federal Highway. This is where everybody went. It had a post office, it had apartments, mixed use apartments upstairs, and grocery store downstairs. It had department store, pharmacy, restaurant. This is where you went in 50s. And it evolved when the road went through, was cut off by Square, it cut off the walking traffic. So it evolved from a bustling commercial social center and activity center to a specialized design-oriented center. There's graphic design, interior design, shoes design, all along that street now. So that was downtown yesterday, and this is what we think of downtown today, Meisner Park. It still has the same element, many of the same elements and plus more, but it's quite an evolution. And of course, Boca Raton was a major station of the Boca Raton Army Airfield. The headquarters building was located on Pine Circle, and was in the middle of putting it on the local register, and the owner was ejected, and he demolished the building before we can do anything about it. But this was a very important building because this is where major military decisions were made and so on. And then we still have some buildings here today that are on campus. This is just an example, but there's several, and then there's several on Spanish River and other streets nearby. And this is where the only airborne radar training took place in the United States, here in this base here. And it contributed greatly to the outcome of World War II. It's a very special memory and contribution to this country. And of course, This is the IBM Center. It's a very, very good example of brutalism architecture with its geometric designs, repetitive designs, and very simple architectural coverage, if you will. It really is a spectacular cluster of buildings, and they're like they call them tree buildings because they're, first of all, they're standing on trees, and then they have these branches sticking out here. So this is where several hundred people worked there until everything's changed. Now it's under new ownership. But it was designed by Marcel Breuer and Robert Gatchie. Marcel Breuer is a international known architect. And this is where the personal computer was developed. This property really should become a national landmark. It offers so much architecturally. It's architect, and it's what it contributed to this country, not just to this country, all over the world. And then, of course, there's Town Hall. This is what it looked like back in 1982 with the awning windows, and note the dome color. And then this is where the employees are working indoors of the Town Hall. And then they left and it was abandoned, and the Historical Society took over the building and they totally restored it inside and outside. And this gives you some of the indication. And right now they're in the middle of reworking the interiors to accommodate today's market. And it's going to be outstanding. Can't wait till it's done. But they haven't done, there's no integrity lost at all in the architecture. Notice the dome is gold. That's what it was initially specified for, but never painted that until the Historical Society took it over. As you can see, it contributes in every way to the community. And it's something that will always be an icon. And there's old Betsy. She's going to her station because this is where it was located, and because they're both on the National Register. So historic significant buildings are very, very important because the loss of historically significant buildings is a loss of community memory. And each building that is lost, that has contributed to the community's past, is a permanent loss to the community's future. So you should treasure your historic resources because they represent a sense of place. Thank you.
Any questions? You can ask. You can ask any questions.
And do you have any questions?